There was a time when the sky over Sheffield wasn't just dark. It was alive, alive with fire, heat, and the pulse of a city in constant motion. The steel mills roared day and night, like the heart of an industrial beast that never needed rest. The hum of the factories wasn't just background noise. It was a promise of work, of pride, of something more than just metal. It was a way of life. And yet in the blink of an eye, it all changed. The night sky, once tinged with the orange glow of molten metal, grew still. The machines fell silent. The city, once so alive with the spirit of steel, was left to remember what it once was. The story of Sheffield is a tale not just of iron and fire, but of a people whose sweat and blood built an empire and then watched it crumble. Sheffield wasn't just a city, it was a destiny carved into the very land it stood on. 5 rivers met in the valley below the Pennine Hills, each contributing its own touch to the transformation of this quiet land into a steel-making titan. The Dawn, the Sheff, the Rivlin, the Loxley, and the Porter. These rivers weren't just watercourses, they were the lifeblood of an industry that would one day change the world. The water wheels that once turned in those rivers powered the mills that made Sheffield's name. The grinding stones that spun in the early morning light ground blades that would become as famous as the city itself. By the 14th century, Sheffield's blades were so well known that even Geoffrey Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, had the miller carry one of them. It wasn't just a knife, it was a symbol of quality, a symbol that everyone, everywhere, recognized. Before steel was born, before the factories rose from the ground, it was the craftsmen of Sheffield who shaped the future. They worked with their hands in humble workshops no larger than a garden shed, forging blades that would last centuries. They were the masters of their craft, the little masters, as they were called. Self-employed, skilled, and proud. It wasn't easy. The dust from the grinding stones filled the air, creating clouds of grit that made the air thick with danger. But these men didn't stop. They worked through it all. But with every blade sharpened, another tragedy was written into the city's story. The dust that sharpened knives also filled their lungs, turning soft tissue into steel. And the name for that affliction was silicosis. For every worker who crafted a blade, another would die before his time. It wasn't long before the little masters were joined by a new breed of industrialists. Among them was Benjamin Huntsman, a clockmaker from Lincolnshire, driven by a singular obsession to create a spring steel so perfect, so strong, that it could withstand the precision demands of clockwork. In 1742, he succeeded, creating a process that would change everything: crucible steel. Huntsman's method allowed steel to be produced in a way that was consistent and pure, like nothing that had come before. For a century after, Sheffield's steel production surged. From just 200 tons in 1770 to 80,000 tons by 1856, the city was transforming. It wasn't just the number of tons that grew, it was the city itself. From 14,500 in 1736, Sheffield's population exploded to 135,000 by 1851. It was a city built on steel, a city where ambition and fire shaped the landscape. But Sheffield did not rest on its laurels. The real revolution came in 1856, when Henry Bessemer introduced a new method that would forever alter the future of steel production. His converter, a pear-shaped vessel, could turn 25 tons of pig iron into steel in less than an hour, far faster than the old methods. And it wasn't just faster, it was cheaper, too. The price of steel collapsed from 50 pounds per ton to just 4 pounds by 1875. It was this breakthrough that solidified Sheffield's place as the heart of the steel world. Bessemer's process found a home in Sheffield, where rolling mills began producing steel at a rate never seen before. Within a decade, Sheffield was supplying 3/4 of the Royal Navy's armor-plated warships. The city's factories had become temples to the industrial gods, Vulcan, Cyclops, Atlas. The men who worked in these mills weren't just laborers, they were the congregation of a new industrial religion. Sheffield's steel was everywhere. The rails that connected continents, the armor that protected navies, the knives and forks on every kitchen table. But what was it like to work in those mills? To be a part of that fire? The heat was unimaginable. Picture this. You're standing in a mill, the floor beneath you shaking with the power of 200 tons of molten steel being poured from a ladle by a crane. The metal, glowing at 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit, isn't just hot. It's blinding. The air is thick with sparks and fumes, and the sound is deafening. A single drop of water touching that molten metal would cause a detonation powerful enough to hurl molten steel across the room. For the men who worked here, every shift was a dance with death. They didn't just make steel, they made the world as we know it. But that price, paid in sweat, in blood, in lives cut short, was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Then came the war. The world was torn apart and Sheffield was once again called upon. As the men marched off to fight, it was the women of Sheffield who stepped into the mills, taking their places alongside the men. They worked long hours, surrounded by the deafening noise, the searing heat, the danger of molten metal. They did what had to be done, and when the war was over, when the men returned, the women were sent home. Their contributions, their sacrifices, were forgotten. They were expected to quietly return to the lives they had left behind. It wasn't until 2016 that their service was finally acknowledged with a statue in Sheffield. But for many of these women, the recognition came too late. But nothing lasts forever. The steel empire of Sheffield began to crumble in the 1970s. Falling global demand, rising costs, and fierce competition took their toll. The government nationalized the steel industry in 1967, but it was a last-ditch effort to stave off the inevitable. By the time Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, the steel industry was in freefall. Under Thatcher's government, Sheffield steelworks were slashed and burned. A new era of privatization was dawning, and with it, the collapse of a way of life. More than 50,000 steel and engineering jobs were lost in just a few short years. Entire communities that had been built around the mills were hollowed out. Men who had spent their lives working the furnaces found themselves standing in unemployment lines, their futures uncertain. By the 1990s, Sheffield had become a shadow of its former self. The mills were gone, replaced by shopping centers and empty factories. The once thriving steel industry had been replaced by a consumer-driven economy, but for the people who had lived and breathed steel, the transition was brutal. Yet even now, Sheffield still makes steel, just not the way it used to. Sheffield Forge Masters, owned by the Ministry of Defense, produces specialty steels for nuclear submarines, offshore platforms, and defense systems. But the glory days of steel, the days when the city burned bright with the light of molten metal, are long gone. And no amount of heritage plaques or museum exhibits can bring back the sound of the Bessemer converters or the smell of steel in the air. If you grew up in Sheffield, you'll know the feeling. The sight of the orange glow in the distance as night fell, the sound of the mills running, the knowledge that the city was alive with the fire of industry. It's a memory that's hard to shake, even after the factories have gone cold. The men who worked the mills, the women who kept the fires burning, and the children who watched the world change from their bedroom windows. They all left behind something that belongs to all of us. Their story is not just a part of Sheffield's history. It's a part of all our histories, a reminder of what was built and what was lost. Today, Sheffield is a city that remembers. It remembers the men who died in the factories, the women who worked to keep the steel flowing, and the children who grew up in the shadow of the mills. It remembers a time when the world was made of fire and metal, a time when the city was more than just a place. It was a force of nature. But memories fade, and the world moves on. The story of Sheffield, like so many other industrial cities, is slipping into the past, forgotten by those who never knew the heat of the furnaces or the roar of the Bessemer converters. If you were lucky enough to be part of that world, if you remember the sound of the mills, the taste of the dust in the air, and the weight of a Sheffield blade in your hand, then you carry something that belongs to all of us. The steel may be gone, but the fire that forged it remains, and it's up to us to keep that fire burning. Share this story. Let others hear the tales of Sheffield's steel mills, the men and women who lived through it all, and the city that once burned bright with fire and ambition. Because the past is only truly gone when we stop remembering. And as long as we remember, Sheffield's fire will never be extinguished. Relive your cherished memories. Watch our video now and take a journey down memory lane. Don't miss out. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay connected and be a part of this nostalgic experience.